An armed conflict between Israel and Hamas-led Palestinian militant groups has been taking place chiefly in and around the Gaza Strip since the 7th of October, 2023. With clashes also taking place in the West Bank and Israel-Lebanon border. On that day, Hamas-led Palestinian militants launched a multi-pronged invasion of southern Israel from the Gaza Strip. Did Hamas militants suddenly attack on Israel? What is the story behind? Today, we will go in depth on this topic.
1,000 Palestinians killed in Gaza by Israel, armed and backed by the US and European allies. More fighting nearby too.
The forced displacement of people, their water, electricity and fuel cut off. Israeli forces have left nothing untouched and no one in Gaza unaffected. Children killed, entire families wiped out.
Violations of international humanitarian law that we are witnessing, becoming a graveyard for children.
The Israeli-Palestinian conflict has its roots in the late 19th and early 20th centuries, with the birth of major nationalist movements among the Jews and among the Arabs, both geared towards attaining sovereignty for their people in the Middle East. The Balfour Declaration was a public statement issued by the British government in 1917 during the First World War, announcing support for the establishment of a national home for the Jewish people in Palestine. The collision between those two movements in southern Levant upon the emergence of Palestinian nationalism after the Franco-Syrian War in the 1920s escalated into the sectarian conflict in Mandatory Palestine in 1930s and 1940s, and expanded into the wider Arab-Israeli conflict later on. The return of several hardline Palestinian Arab nationalists, under the emerging leadership of Hajj Amin al-Husseini, from Damascus to Mandatory Palestine marked the beginning of Palestinian Arab nationalist struggle towards establishment of a national home for Arabs of Palestine. Amin al-Husseini, the architect of the Palestinian Arab national movement, immediately marked Jewish national movement and Jewish immigration to Palestine as the sole enemy to his cause, initiating large-scale riots against the Jews as early as 1920 in Jerusalem and in 1921 in Jaffa. Among the results of the violence was the establishment of the Jewish paramilitary force Haganah. In 1929, a series of violent riots resulted in the deaths of 133 Jews and 116 Arabs, with significant Jewish casualties in Hebron and Safed, and the evacuation of Jews from Hebron and Gaza. In the early 1930s, the Arab national struggle in Palestine had drawn many Arab nationalist militants from across the Middle East, such as Sheikh Izzuddin al-Qassam from Syria, who established the Black Hand militant group and had prepared the grounds for the 1936-1939 Arab revolt in Palestine. Following the death of al-Qassam at the hands of the British in late 1935, tensions erupted in 1936 into the Arab general strike and general boycott. The strike soon deteriorated into violence, and the Arab revolt was bloodily repressed by the British assisted by associated forces of the Jewish Settlement Police, the Jewish Supernumerary Police, and Special Night Squads. In the first wave of organized violence, lasting until early 1937, most of the Arab groups were defeated by the British, and forced expulsion of much of the Arab leadership ensued. The revolt led to the establishment of the Peel Commission towards partitioning of Palestine, though it was subsequently rejected by the Palestinian Arabs. The two main Jewish leaders, Chaim Weizmann and David Ben-Gurion, accepted the recommendations, but some secondary Jewish leaders disapproved of it. The renewed violence, which continued sporadically until the beginning of World War II, ended with around 5,000 casualties, mostly from the Arab side. With the eruption of World War II, the situation in Mandatory Palestine calmed down. It allowed a shift towards a more moderate stance among Palestinian Arabs under the leadership of the Nashishibi clan, and even the establishment of the Jewish Arab Palestine Regiment under British command, fighting Germans in North Africa. The more radical exiled faction of al-Husseini, however, tended to cooperate with Nazi Germany, and participated in the establishment of a pro-Nazi propaganda machine throughout the Arab world. The defeat of Arab nationalists in Iraq, and subsequent relocation of al-Husseini to Nazi-occupied Europe tied his hands regarding field operations in Palestine. Though he regularly demanded that the Italians and the Germans bomb Tel Aviv. By the end of World War II, a crisis over the fate of the Holocaust survivors from Europe led to renewed tensions between the Yishuv and the Palestinian Arab leadership. Immigration quotas were established by the British, while on the other hand illegal immigration and Zionist insurgency against the British was increasing. On the 29th of November, 1947, the General Assembly of the United Nations adopted Resolution 181 recommending the adoption and implementation of a plan to partition Palestine into an Arab state, a Jewish state and the city of Jerusalem. On the next day, Palestine was swept by violence. For 4 months, under continuous Arab provocation and attack. The Yishuv was usually on the defensive while occasionally retaliating. The Arab League supported the Arab struggle by forming the volunteer-based Arab Liberation Army, supporting the Palestinian Arab Army of the Holy War under the leadership of Abd al-Qadi al-Husseini and Hassan Salama. On the Jewish side, the civil war was managed by the major underground militias, the Haganah, Irgun and Lehi, strengthened by numerous Jewish veterans of World War II and foreign volunteers. By spring 1948, it was already clear that the Arab forces were nearing a total collapse, while Yishuv forces gained more and more territory, creating a large-scale refugee problem of Palestinian Arabs. Even before the British mandate expired on May 14, 1948, Zionist paramilitaries were already embarking on a military operation to destroy Palestinian towns and villages to expand the borders of the Zionist state that was to be born. In April 1948, more than 100 Palestinian men, women and children were killed in the village of Deir Yassin on the outskirts of Jerusalem. That set the tone for the rest of the operation, and from 1947 to 1949, more than 500 Palestinian villages, towns and cities were destroyed in what Palestinians refer to as the Nakba, or catastrophe in Arabic. An estimated 15,000 Palestinians were killed, including in dozens of massacres. The Zionist movement captured 78% of historic Palestine. The remaining 22% was divided into what are now the occupied West Bank and the besieged Gaza Strip. An estimated 750,000 Palestinians were forced out of their homes. Today their descendants live as 6 million refugees in 58 squalid camps throughout Palestine and in the neighboring countries of Lebanon, Syria, Jordan and Egypt. On May 15, 1948, Israel announced its establishment. The following day, the First Arab-Israeli War began and fighting ended in January 1949 after an armistice between Israel and Egypt, Lebanon, Jordan and Syria. In December 1948, the UN General Assembly passed Resolution 194, which calls for the right of return for Palestinian refugees. 1948 Arab-Israeli War. Following the declaration of the establishment of the State of Israel on the 14th of May, 1948, the Arab League decided to intervene on behalf of Palestinian Arabs, marching their forces into former British Palestine, beginning the main phase of the 1948 Arab-Israeli War. The overall fighting, leading to around 15,000 casualties, resulted in ceasefire and armistice agreements of 1949, with Israel holding much of the former Mandate territory, Jordan occupying and later annexing the West Bank and Egypt taking over the Gaza Strip, where the All-Palestine government was declared by the Arab League on the 22nd of September, 1948. 1956 Arab-Israeli War. Through the 1950s, Jordan and Egypt supported the Palestinian Fedayeen militants' cross-border attacks into Israel, while Israel carried out its own reprisal operations in the host countries. The 1956 Suez Crisis resulted in a short-term Israeli occupation of the Gaza Strip, an exile of the All-Palestine government, which was later restored with Israeli withdrawal. The All-Palestine government was completely abandoned by Egypt in 1959, and was officially merged into the United Arab Republic to the detriment of the Palestinian national movement. Gaza Strip then was put under the authority of the Egyptian military administrator, making it a de facto military occupation. In 1964, however, a new organization, the Palestine Liberation Organization, was established by Yasser Arafat. It immediately won the support of most Arab League governments and was granted a seat in the Arab League. 1967 Arab-Israeli War. The 1967 Six-Day War exerted a significant effect upon Palestinian nationalism, as Israel gained military control of the West Bank from Jordan and the Gaza Strip from Egypt. Consequently, the PLO was unable to establish any control on the ground and established its headquarters in Jordan, home to hundreds of thousands of Palestinians, and supported the Jordanian army during the War of Attrition, which included the Battle of Karama. However, the Palestinian base in Jordan collapsed with the Jordanian-Palestinian Civil War in 1970. The PLO defeat by the Jordanians caused most of the Palestinian militants to relocate to South Lebanon, where they soon took over large areas, creating the so-called Fatahland. 1973 Arab-Israeli War. On October 6, 1973, a coalition of Arab forces consisting of mainly Egypt and Syria launched a surprise attack against Israel on the Jewish holy day of Yom Kippur. Egypt and Syria had crossed over the ceasefire lines that were agreed upon prior to 1973. Egypt had in particular tried to reoccupy much of the area surrounding the Suez Canal, whilst the front line with Syria was mainly situated around the north in the Golan Heights. The war concluded with an Israeli victory, with both sides suffering tremendous casualties. First Intifada. The first Palestinian uprising began in 1987 as a response to escalating attacks and the endless occupation. By the early 1990s, international efforts to settle the conflict had begun, in light of the success of the Egyptian-Israeli peace treaty of 1982. Eventually, the Israeli-Palestinian peace process led to the Oslo Accords of 1993, allowing the PLO to relocate from Tunisia and take ground in the West Bank and Gaza Strip, establishing the Palestinian National Authority. The peace process also had significant opposition among radical Islamic elements of Palestinian society, such as Hamas and Palestinian Islamic Jihad, who immediately initiated a campaign of attacks targeting Israelis. Following hundreds of casualties and a wave of radical anti-government propaganda, Israeli Prime Minister Rabin was assassinated by an Israeli far-right extremist who objected to the peace initiative. This struck a serious blow to the peace process, from which the newly elected government of Israel in 1996 backed off. Second Intifada. Following several years of unsuccessful negotiations, the conflict re-erupted as the Second Intifada in September 2000. The violence, escalating into an open conflict between the Palestinian National Security Forces and the Israel Defense Forces, lasted until 2004-2005 and led to approximately 130 fatalities. In 2005, Israeli Prime Minister Sharon ordered the removal of Israeli settlers and soldiers from Gaza. Israel and its Supreme Court formally declared an end to occupation, saying it had no effective control over what occurred in Gaza. However, the United Nations, Human Rights Watch and many other international bodies and NGOs continue to consider Israel to be the occupying power of the Gaza Strip, as Israel controls Gaza Strip's airspace, territorial waters, and controls the movement of people or goods in or out of Gaza by air or sea. Israeli far-right government and 2023 war. In November 2022, with the election of the 37th government of Israel, a coalition government led by Benjamin Netanyahu and notable for its inclusion of far-right politicians, violence in the conflict increased, with events such as the January 2023 Jenin incursion, the June 2023 Jenin incursion, the July 2023 Jenin incursion, the 2023 Neve Yaakov shooting, the 2023 Al-Aqsa clashes, and the May 2023 Gaza-Israel clashes. Alongside Palestinian political violence has produced a death toll in 2023 that is the highest in the conflict. since 2005. This culminated in the 2023 Israel-Hamas war, when Hamas-led militant groups launched a surprise attack on southern Israel from the Gaza Strip, killing hundreds of Israeli civilians and taking hostages. The Israeli military retaliated by conducting an extensive aerial bombardment campaign on Gazan targets, followed by an ongoing large-scale ground invasion of Gaza with the stated goal of destroying Hamas and controlling Gaza afterwards. Oslo Accords. In 1993, Israeli officials, led by Yitzhak Rabin, and Palestinian leaders from the Palestine Liberation Organization led by Yasser Arafat strove to find a peaceful solution through what became known as the Oslo Peace Process. A crucial milestone in this process was Arafat's letter of recognition of Israel's right to exist. In 1993, the Oslo Accords were finalized as a framework for future Israeli-Palestinian relations. The crux of the Oslo Agreement was that Israel would gradually cede control of the Palestinian territories over to the Palestinians in exchange for peace. The Oslo process was delicate and progressed in fits and starts. The process took a turning point at the assassination of Yitzhak Rabin in November 1995, and finally unraveled when Arafat and Aid Barak failed to reach an agreement at Camp David in July 2000. Robert Malley, Special Assistant to U.S. President Bill Clinton for Arab-Israeli Affairs, has confirmed that while Barak made no formal written offer to Arafat, the U.S. did present concepts for peace which were considered by the Israeli side yet left unanswered by Arafat. The Palestinians' principal failing is that from the beginning of the Camp David summit onward, they were unable either to say yes to the American ideas or to present a cogent and specific counter-proposal of their own. Consequently, there are different accounts of the proposals considered. Camp David Summit. In July 2000, U.S. President Bill Clinton convened a peace summit between Palestinian President Yasser Arafat and Israeli Prime Minister Aid Barak. Barak reportedly put forward the following as basis for negotiation via the U.S. to the Palestinian president: a non-militarized Palestinian state split into three, for parts containing 92% of the West Bank including only parts of East Jerusalem, and the entire Gaza Strip, as well as a stipulation that 69 Jewish settlements would be ceded to Israel, no right of return to Israel, no sovereignty over the Temple Mount or any core East Jerusalem neighborhoods, and continued Israel control over the Jordan Valley. Arafat rejected this offer. According to the Palestinian negotiators, the offer did not remove many of the elements of the Israeli occupation regarding land, security, settlements, and Jerusalem. President Clinton reportedly requested that Arafat make a counteroffer, but he proposed none. Former Israeli Foreign Minister Shlomo Ben-Ami, who kept a diary of the negotiation, said in an interview in 2001, when asked whether the Palestinians made a counter-proposal, no. And that is the heart of the matter. Never, in the negotiations between us and the Palestinians, was there a Palestinian counter-proposal. In a separate interview in 2006, Ben-Ami stated that were he a Palestinian he would have rejected the Camp David offer. No tenable solution was crafted which would satisfy both Israeli and Palestinian demands, even under intense U.S. pressure. Clinton has long blamed Arafat for the collapse of the summit. In the months following the summit, Clinton appointed former U.S. Senator George J. Mitchell to lead a fact-finding committee aiming to identify strategies for restoring the peace process. The committee's findings were published in 2001 with the dismantlement of existing Israeli settlements, and Palestinian crackdown on militant activity being one strategy. This conflict has been going on for more than 75 years. During the wars and the whole conflict, mainly the mass people are suffering. Let us all come together and unite against any sort of war and inhuman activities. Thank you.